Now let's head into our first post-lunch session, and this is a deep dive into the digitalization of financial services. And our guest speaker comes to us all the way from Indonesia, and I'm pleased to welcome Edward Kilian, CMO at LinkAja. And moderating the session will be ADA's Keith Lee, who is with our Business Insights team, where he's the head of financial services. Over to you guys.
Hey, thank you so much, Steph. Right after the poll, I was also imagining myself driving a flying car sometime in the future. So I hope everyone is fully recharged from lunch. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. Now, before I introduce our panelists for today, I would like to draw reference to the view of one of our earlier panelists, Florent, who talked about how to pivot from the urgent topics by enabling financial services to scale while meeting increasing regulatory scrutiny in the financial service sector. And more importantly, how does digitalization help to shape our future financial sector? So with this in mind, I would like to introduce our panelists for today, Mr. Edward Kilian. Now, Edward is a Chief Marketing Officer of LinkAja. Edward also comes with extensive experience in sales and marketing, as well as driving business strategy over a broad spectrum of industry. And before we start, to all our audience, I would like to invite you to please leave your questions in the Q&A session, and we'll try to address them as much as we can. Hello, Edward. Very good to have you here with us today.
Yes, my pleasure, Kit.
Right, so Edward, let's get started. For today, I would just like to first cover one of the hottest topics as we're all facing right now, which is COVID-19. So probably just to like to tap into your opinion, how has COVID-19 as a whole impacted the financial services sector, including LinkAja?
Yes, the COVID-19 is actually, as a fact, it's a challenging time for us doing financial service in Indonesia, both on the consumer as well as the business sides. So we know that actually people are limiting their mobility and they are more cautious of spendings. Even at the beginning of the social distancing period across various cities in Indonesia, we saw a deep drop in terms of offline merchant transactions and especially also on the transportation payment. However, we also see an upside of the impact from the pandemic related to digital financial services. So on two sides of the story, so the consumer sides, there are actually higher motivations to adopt on digital platforms, especially for example, what we saw is about telcos, products purchases, utility bills payments, and then e-commerce transactions. And the most interesting part is actually the motivation is no longer about the price or promotion driven, but it's more related towards the safety or access or even convenience to the consumer sides. On the second side, which is on the business side, we saw also that the business are more open to connect to digital platform to make sure that they are still ongoing with the business, as the consumer sides demand now about transactions that is more towards the contactless transactions. Nonetheless, we also saw that actually some of the SMEs in Indonesia, they are still need some help to be onboarded on these digitalizations.
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree with your view that because of the black swan effect of COVID-19, it tends to drive us to become more digitally savvy. So I'm sure this is one very interesting question for all of us. So what has been the secret formula for LinkAja to stay ahead of the game?
Yeah, the game is actually for all the digital payments players like us. It's actually about changing the people behavior from cash to cashless. So the pandemic in such a way is actually creating a stimulus to accelerate this shift. But for LinkAja specifically, the key for us is basically to grow the ecosystem, especially related to the essential needs of payments. So to make sure that we make it very practical for people to convert from cash to cashless and creating a good user experience where they're actually moving to cashless. Today, we are actually building the solid ecosystem. This is actually namely by the ecosystem that we merge. For example, on the transportation ride-hailing, we are accepted as a source of fund in Grab and Gojek. On the e-commerce side, we've been accepted in Bukalapak, Tokopedia, Mini Market is like Alfamart, Indomart. And then we also become a source of fund in multiple complete ecosystem of public transport in Indonesia, like commuter line, LRT, MRT, Transjakarta, and so on. As well as the ecosystem related to the telcos product, bills payments, that actually to make sure that it becomes very practical when actually users starting to embrace the cashless society, and then they find it actually the ecosystem that they can use the cashless method is actually very wide range. So during this time, when actually people have more concern on the hygiene using cash, this has actually become very critical and essential to be able to meet the demand and their needs during this difficult time.
Sure. So in that sense, let's look at two sides of the industry, right? Supply and demand aspects. Let's start off with supply side. In your opinion, what are the challenges faced by traditional businesses in the near future, and how can financial services help, especially when it comes to digitalization?
Yeah, so during this pandemic time, we actually see two types of traditional businesses. The first one is actually the one that quite familiar with technology. They are actually able to quickly adapt with digital environment and be able to extend their business on digitals. The second one is actually those who are a bit behind in terms of technology adoptions. Unfortunately, this is actually a very large segment to be told. So getting traditional business going digital, it's actually the first key steps for financial services to be able to help on traditional business to open their future access for example, the typical financial services for them. So in a nutshell, it actually still needs a massive effort. It's starting from the infrastructure itself, the educations, to make sure that this traditional business that is actually still have a technological gap to be on board. So we are actually need to work together because this is actually a massive work to be done. So we actually working together with some of the ministries to help penetrate and onboard these traditional businesses, as well as because LinkAja is actually having a quite strong of shareholders in Indonesia, which is namely the largest 3 SOE banks. So we work together with them to get this traditional business and help them on board on the digitalizations.
Right. So in a country like Indonesia, we imagine the dominance of cash usage, right? Because it's part of the life of our life for so long. And how do you actually play a role from LinkAja's perspective in changing such a market behavior to become more digitally savvy, to become more accustomed to digital payments?
Yes. So first thing first, actually, because sometimes people also wonder that I don't have an issue of using cash, so why should I move to cashless? And then the ecosystem of cashless itself is actually much more limited than the cash ecosystems. So the first important part is basically to make sure that the ecosystem development of going cashless is actually well built, so that people realize that actually how convenient and how easy it is when they're actually migrating to cashless. The second thing is also something that we do. We also need to actually build the bridge of people going from cash to cashless. We should not deny that actually there are still a lot that actually ecosystem that's still on the cash basis. So therefore, actually, this is something that we built at LinkAja. For example, we built a feature that we call actually it's a cardless ATM cash withdrawal. So this is actually where we work together with more than a few thousands of ATM from the Himbara banks, the SOE banks, to enable that people can actually take the LinkAja balance, the e-money balance, through the ATM without the need of the ATM card itself. So this is actually to also address the worry of the market saying that, what if I still need some cash? So some of the bridges also need to be built to make sure that people not only attracted to the ecosystem, but also addressing the worry if, for example, the surrounding of their ecosystem is still needing on the cash basis.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that you definitely have a systematic approach in mind to start transiting, the population towards a full digital adoption. So now let's talk a little bit about demand side, right? Because I think one of the key issues that is being faced by industry here is unbanked population. So how does the financial services sector address this issue at the moment?
Yeah, so let's start with what is actually the starting point of these issues of people becoming unbanked. So we will see actually there will be 3 parts, which is one is actually the cost to serve. And then the second one is a lack of credit history. And third one is actually long processing time. This is actually mainly when we are still doing financial services in the traditional ways, in such a way that we need to open the branches. We need people to actually to serving the people. And then with the traditional way of doing credit history, like asking, what do you have, and so on and so forth, this is actually making it very difficult for people to actually to be on board, to be recognized on their history. And then because everything is manual, it becomes very long on the processing from people applying into like getting some of the financial services access. Therefore, this is actually the main reason why LinkAja, we actually starting our business from digital payments. Even though ultimately we would like to become the financial services platform, we understand that actually to address these 3 main issues, we need to start from somewhere, which is on the on the digital payments. So on the digital payments, we will be able to, one, because we are on the digital platform, we will be able to connect and serve everyone with the digital platform efficiently. And then the second thing, we will be able to also understand our user with their payment profile and history, so that actually we can serve them with the financial services product that suit their need at a mitigated risk. So this is actually the biggest opportunity as well as the challenges that we need to serve for the underbanked and unbanked.
So in that case, in order to ensure financial inclusiveness for all, would you see an increasing importance of leveraging alternative data, such as telco or even utilities data for that matter, in terms of to better assess the creditworthiness of the population?
Yes, that would be the very critical way of doing this in a different way. So even some the regulatory in Indonesia, they are more open now to actually to exercise on the opportunity using or leveraging on the third-party credit scorings. And the payment data, for example, the telcos that you purchases, for example, the transactions of gasolines or utility bills payments, this will help us to actually understand the users. And because of this, for example, we will be able to understand a lot of things using certain proxies. For example, with the data of payment, the gasoline, for example, we will be able to understand whether the ownerships of assets, whether it's motorcycle or having cars. When actually we facilitating a payments of public transport, or we know people are actually commuting from point A to point B every day, 5 days in a week, we know they have a routine jobs, right? And then by actually facilitating or understanding the data of electricity of utility household spending, we will be able to understand their household spending or the kind of the type of houses that they possess. So this actually the critical part that we will be able to understand the users in the much better and faster way. And because this payment data is dynamic and work on the predictive engines, this is actually helping us to understand each of our customers in almost a near real-time processing time.
Sure. So with all this transformation that's happening in the financial services industry, what are the opportunities lying ahead for us in the financial services sector in the next year and beyond?
Yes. So I think the previous slides already share about the large number of the underbanked and unbanked, which actually don't have the access to financial services. By all means, actually, the underbanked and unbanked, they still need financial services. And they probably already now getting some financial services from quote unquote the informal sources, right? Which actually rather than giving them a progress, they're actually giving them a burden, right? The digitalizations, I believe, will be helping to address this population, the underbanked and unbanked, democratize the access of financial services in a prudent way, or for both actually, for the consumer and the player itself, like the bank or the P2P players, so financial institutions.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of exciting times ahead for the financial services sector. I'll probably just take a couple of questions from the audience. So one of this interesting question that comes from one of our audience that how does LinkAja actually leverage on the data that you have been collecting out of your digitalization efforts, and how do you actually utilize that to bring more value to your customers?
Yes, I can probably share a few related with the data utilizations that we had. So first is obviously when we starting our business as a payments, we understand that actually we do have a certain verticals, and some of the users we know that actually by understanding the payments data, we will be able the type of customer, what type of customers or type of users they are, and the potential services that will be required or probably needed by them. So the cross-selling is something that very straightforward that we are doing. The second thing is actually the data that we are collecting, the predictive modeling that we built, is actually being able to now actually providing that as the scoring or mitigated risk for the partners that we are doing on serving some financial services. This can be, for example, our partner of P2P lending, for example, or even the banks, or even the insurance or the investment company. So they are actually starting to leverage on our data and articulations of a user profile to be able to serve this market at the mitigated risk.
Excellent. I'll probably take another question from the audience. Here goes to you, Edward. Says, I understand that digitalization is the way to go for most industry, right? But for financial services, I do worry that businesses are jumping on the bandwagon too quickly. And this regarding things like business continuity management and cybersecurity. What are your thoughts on this, Edward? And how
Yes.
does LinkAja actually protect yourself from such risks?
Yes, I think the first good thing about us is actually our setup is different. So we don't set our company out of nowhere, then out of a sudden we just started deciding that we're just doing this. So our parents company, shareholder company, is basically it's a state-owned enterprises, and 3 of 10 of our shareholder are the banks. The state-owned enterprise bank, which is the largest banks in Indonesia. So this actually is helping us a lot to actually to jump ship in terms of preparing for the business continuity, and then also helping on the cyber security. So this actually to make sure that we don't start from scratch actually. And one of our shareholder is also Telkomsel, which they are very confident, and also they are very experienced in terms of cyber security attacks and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, I think it's about the talents as well, and also the cultures that we need to build inside of the company. So for example, even at LinkAja, we do have a team that is actually really doing on focus on the compliance as well as the IT security. So this is a team on its own, as well as actually meeting up the standard of, for example, the ISOs and so on and so forth, to make sure that actually we work closely. And when we do the operations, it's not like as simple as because we have a certain ideas, but the due diligence, the process, and so on, it's just supposed to follow one is the regulations. Second is also to follow the protections of the customers as well as LinkAja.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll probably take one last question for the session. Here goes, referring to SME revenue expectation chart, which was shown earlier. What does post-COVID mean? Since the world hasn't really recovered fully from the pandemic. So what does it really mean for us in the future?
Yes, so we do understand that actually today it's actually very difficult time, for example, on generating the revenue, and then the SMEs is also a sectors that get hit quite hard in Indonesia. So this actually means that, for example, when we look at the business streams, for example, revenue from SMEs and so on, we might need to also to consider whether or not we need to reshift some of the streams. But we also need to remember about what kind of revenue we expect from the SME. So for LinkAja, there are 2 streams of revenue. One is actually getting from the payments sides, and second is actually getting from the financial service sides. On the payment side is something that we are working, and according with the trends that we have now, with the accelerated growth on, for example, digital payments, this is something that actually growing, right? But we know, for example, on the financial services, we need to be very cautious. For example, because the risk is actually increasing quite significantly during this difficult time. But again, with the backup from the shareholders that we had, it actually makes it a bit easier for us, because it's not coming from a typical, for example, limited kind of resources and so on. So there's something that we can mitigate. But for example, if you look at your, for example, the starting points, or probably the fund that actually become very risky, it might be very challenging, and you might want to actually to see some reschedulings on the forecast and so on and so forth. But if you like, for example, like LinkAja, when we have the payment stream and we have the financial service stream, and the financial services actually backed up by the shareholder, which is very strong and experienced in this part, it's something that can be mitigated, and probably we don't need to shift quite a lot in terms of forecasting.
Right. So it's really encouraging to be speaking with you, Edward, on such an exciting topic. I wish you all the best in your business, and I'm glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Keith. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, guys. Financial services is going through a lot of disruption, and it's great that there's still a lot of opportunity out there. You're doing some fantastic work in LinkAja. Thanks for sharing.